Consider this graphic representing the word deconstruction. As the digital cursor attempts to select it, the letters fracture and rewrite themselves. This illustrates a central paradox. While scholars often seek a clear-cut definition of the term, the act of defining it rigidly contradicts its very nature. This resistance to fixed definition is what Jacques Derrida investigated throughout his career. A common misconception labels his work as a negative exercise, a form of intellectual vandalism, or a nihilistic urge to break things down for the sake of destruction. In practice, deconstruction is a structural diagnostic. As this architectural rendering shows, the process identifies the foundational conditions, the specific rules and boundaries that allow a philosophical system to stand up on its feet. It simultaneously investigates the limits of those conditions, looking for the points where a system eventually buckles under its own internal logic. Derrida's project addressed the mechanics of Western thought, targeting the way we categorize, privilege, and stabilize ideas. To understand how he decenters these structures, we must first map the inherited linguistic and metaphysical rules that deconstruction inherited. We will trace this shift through three key pillars: the structural linguistics of the early 20th century, the deep ontology of Western metaphysics, and the application of these ideas in literary criticism. By walking through these disciplines, we can systematically observe how humans derive meaning from language. What emerges is a view of deconstruction as a diagnostic of how meaning is constructed and controlled. The first pillar begins with Ferdinand de Saussure, who established that the relationship between a word and its meaning is arbitrary. In this diagram, there is no natural physical connection between the specific letters in the word sister and the human being that word describes. The word and the concept are locked together by social consensus and historical convention. Because these connections are not inherent, Saussure argued that language has no positive elements of its own. A word only gains its identity by distinguishing itself from what it is not. We recognize phonetic sounds through contrast. In this visual, the letter P is defined entirely by the negative space cut out from other consonants like T or S. Derrida observed Western philosophy took this basic linguistic mechanic and built its entire worldview on binary oppositions. These are the contrasts that dominate our thinking: light versus dark, good versus evil, and man versus woman. This scale reveals a structural bias. Society rarely treats these binaries as equal. One term is privileged as a superior presence, while the other is marginalized as an inferior absence. This mechanism maps to societal hierarchies. Darkness is often defined merely as the lack of light, and in patriarchal texts, women have historically been framed as secondary, defined by their distance from male characteristics. Derrida called this logocentrism. It is the encoding of these structural biases, specifically the privileging of presence and spoken truth, into the architecture of our vocabulary. Social hierarchies often manifest these linguistic patterns, revealing how the grammar we use to communicate encodes biases of presence and absence. To understand why presence is so heavily privileged, we look to Martin Heidegger, who sought to dismantle the Western philosophical tradition by questioning how we define existence itself. Heidegger pointed out that Western thinkers often substituted an interrogation of being with a simple checklist of physical objects. This demonstrates how we prove existence in everyday speech. To establish a table is real, we rely on the present tense. The table is. Heidegger called this the metaphysics of presence. Philosophy equates an object's truth with its immediate physical presence in the current moment. Derrida connected this obsession with presence back to the binaries of language, explaining why society inherently trusts speech over writing. Speaking requires the speaker and listener to occupy the same space, creating an illusion of immediate, verifiable truth. Conversely, writing is the practice of absence. The author is not there to defend the text, leaving the words severed from their source and open to misinterpretation. For centuries, philosophy has chased this illusion of pure presence, constructing a lopsided system highly susceptible to deconstructive analysis. To expose the flaws in this logic, Derrida challenged our assumptions about reading. When we look up a word to find its meaning, we must ask what we are actually finding. If we search for a noun like interest in this dictionary interface, we expect to find a concrete concept. Instead, the dictionary provides more words like hobby or advantage. If we look up hobby, we find activity, which points to action. This creates a cascading failure of meaning. Because the definition of one signifier is just a set of other signifiers, we are trapped in an infinite recursive web of words pointing to other words. We often stop searching because of the illusion that we have understood. We rely on the concept of the transcendental signified, the belief that if we follow the chain long enough, we will reach a final meaning that exists outside of language. Derrida concludes that this final meaning does not exist. Meaning is always promised by language, but it is permanently postponed. He created a specific term for this. He combined the French verbs for to differ, to distinguish, and to defer, to postpone. Notice the spelling change here. Derrida takes the French word différance, replaces the E with an A, and triggers a visual error. This targets the bias of phonocentrism. If you speak the word out loud, the French pronunciation for both spellings is identical. You cannot hear the difference in this audio waveform. You can only see it in writing. This spelling trick dismantles the metaphysics of presence by proving that writing contains specific meaning that speech completely misses. Différance is the invisible force that allows us to distinguish concepts while simultaneously postponing their final definitions. It prevents any system from claiming absolute truth. This realization affected other disciplines. In the 1960s, anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss used structuralism to critique Western science and metaphysics. Derrida identified a flaw here. Structuralism tried to attack the metaphysical tradition using the exact assumptions and vocabulary it inherited from that tradition. This is the auto-critique trap. You cannot step outside of language to critique language. The inherited words you use already contain the biases of the system you are attacking. Derrida's axiom states, language bears within itself the necessity of its own critique. Every text contains a blind spot allowing it to be dismantled. Deconstruction is therefore an endless process of self-criticism that even deconstructive writing must submit to. In the 1970s, these ideas reached Yale University, disrupting American literature departments. The Yale School, including critics like Harold Bloom, applied Derrida's theories to romantic poetry and aesthetic texts. They concluded that because of the slippery nature of signifiers and figurative language, a literary text possesses multiple, equally valid, undecidable meanings. This approach to dismantling binaries extended beyond literature, providing a framework for modern social theories to analyze systemic power. Here we see the application in action. Feminist theorists use deconstruction to subvert the patriarchal male-female binary, and post-colonial theorists use it to unmask ideological agendas in the texts of the colonizer and the colonized. Understanding history and society requires understanding the textuality of those structures, recognizing that our social realities are constructed through the same differential language found in our dictionaries. Deconstruction does not erase meaning. It forces us to take responsibility for how meaning is built, ensuring we aren't trapped by the illusion of finality.